What's up, family? Happy Friday and happy Black History Month. Welcome back to another week on Guns and Butter with your favorite cousin, Kinda G. Now, I hope y'all had a good week because you already know I missed you. But let me give y'all a glimpse of how my week went, just a little bit. So, it's tax season. I got my W-2s back. I said, cool. Let me see how much I'm going to get back. I'm going to just put it into TurboTax. I'm not going to file it. I just want to give myself a little estimate so I can start preparing myself for what my bank account can be expecting soon. Last year was a good year. My palms is itching. I just feel it. God said, this is your year. So I put my W-2s into TurboTax and it kept saying this low number. And I'm like, what the fuck? That can't be right. So I finished all the steps. I got to the end and I did my reading because, reading is fundamental. I read what it actually said. And that low number I thought I was going to get back is actually how much I owe. I said, I know you fucking lying, Mr. TurboTax. I'm calling the police. I need to report a real serious crime.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
Now, cousins, this week at the dinner table, I'm going to be telling y'all about a mass murder committed by 35-year-old Jessie Dotson. This nigga took the phrase snitches get stitches to a whole nother level. This man plotted for 13 and a half years on how he was going to get his lick back. To him, revenge was inevitable. This case was recorded as the worst mass murder in the city's history. But listen, the fact that it took place in Memphis and it's the worst mass murder in the city's history tells you a lot. Because in Memphis, they live raw. They live rough. All right, y'all, let me give you a quick background. So one of the victims in this case, his name is Cecil Dotson. He's Jessie's younger brother. Now, everybody in the family had a nickname, and Jessie's nickname is Junior. So they talked about how they grew up and how Cecil used to look up to him, and he was really influenced by Jessie a lot. But at the age of 19, Jessie ended up trying to finesse a man during a drug deal, and he ended up killing him. Now, the word was Cecil supposedly snitched on Jessie, and he was charged with second-degree murder. He ended up having to serve 13 and a half years. So while Jessie locked up, he letting everybody in prison know his family pretty much left him for dead. They ain't putting no money on his books, and they damn sure don't come to visit. Meanwhile, while he's serving time, his brother is out living his best life. He's a free man. He ended up joining the gang called the GDs. But at the age of 30, he decided, he wanted to change his life around. So he got out the gang life. He moved out of South Memphis. And, he really started to get himself together. He got himself a nice little house. He got a couple cars. He got a woman. He got some kids. Living the real American dream type shit. And when Jessie comes home, he's working for his daddy as a painter. And Cecil was somebody who once looked up to him. So he looking at him like, damn, this is the life that I wanted for myself. And over time, he grows more and more envious of his little brother. And the hostility that he already had for his family grows to immense measures when he gets home from prison and he sees that his family really had the nerve to move on without him. So on an early Sunday morning on March 3rd, 2008, police are called to a little house on Leicester Street. When they first enter their house, they're standing in the middle of a massacre. The walls are painted red with blood. Bullet holes everywhere. The carpets are soaked with blood. The furniture has blood in it, like it's everywhere. And there's 4 adults laid out in the living room. The first person they see is 30-year-old Cecil Dotson. And because this is Cecil's home, they assume that he was the target behind this massacre and everybody else was just collateral damage. They also find his girlfriend and the mother of 4 of his children, 27-year-old Marissa Williams. Next, they find Cecil's good friend, 33-year-old Hollis Sills, and his 22-year-old girlfriend, Shendry Robinson, and they had just come over to visit Cecil. So they continue on through the house, and as they get to the back area, they find all 5 of Cecil's children in unspeakable conditions. The two deceased children are Cecil's sons, 4-year-old Camario Dotson and 2-year-old Cecil Dotson II. And by nothing but the grace of God, they find 3 surviving children, a 4-year-old, a 2-month-old, and in a blood-splattered bathroom with blood all over the sink, the floors, the toilet seat, they find 9-year-old Cecil Jr. laying lifeless in the bathtub. And he gives his first sign of life when he turns his head slightly. And it's then when they see the blade sticking out of his tiny skull. So back in the living room, they see a shotgun laying next to Cecil. So they're walking through the house trying to collect all of his shell casings, and they only find shell casings from a 9 and a 380. So, of course, because there's 2 weapons, they assume that there's multiple shooters. Now, they don't find any shotgun shell casings, which is the weapon that was laying next to Cecil. So this tells us that he wasn't even given the opportunity to defend himself, his home, and most importantly, his 5 children. So now I'm going to go into detail about the injuries that all of the victims sustained. So just stay with me, okay? So 2-year-old Cecil died of multiple sharp force injuries, including 7 stab wounds, and most of them were in his head. His 4-year-old brother Camario died of blunt and sharp force injuries to his head. He had cuts on his head and his neck, but the stab wound in his chest was the one that pierced his lungs. Now, their 30-year-old father, Cecil, died of multiple gunshot wounds, 8 to be exact. He had a shot in his head, his neck, his chest, and his right leg, and the last 4 were in his left leg. Their mother, 27-year-old Marissa, died of multiple gunshot wounds as well, 1 in the head, the chest, the abdomen, the left, and the right leg. Cecil's good friend Hollis suffered from 3 gunshot wounds, 1 to the mouth, and 2 to the chest. Hollis's 22-year-old girlfriend, Chandra Robertson, was hit with 4 bullets. 3 struck her left leg and 1 hit her right leg. Cecil and Marissa had 3 surviving children, 2-month-old baby girl, Kanaya, and she luckily survived with a major head wound. 4-year-old Cedric, who had head trauma, multiple facial fractures, a fractured skull, and he had stab wounds on both sides of his eyes. And the key to this whole investigation was 9-year-old Cecil Jr. He was the one that investigators found laying in the bathtub with the blade in his head. Now, he had defensive wounds on his arms and his hands. So based on the timing and how the bodies are beginning to turn, they figured that they were most likely there for a good 24 to 48 hours. So that means that these 3 babies that survived laid in that house with their dead parents, covered in blood, hoping and praying for somebody to come and rescue them. So of course they collect all the evidence, they swipe for fingerprints, and they do whatever they can to save these babies. And back at headquarters, they end up getting their first potential lead, so they think. A 14-year-old girl who happens to be a part of Cecil's extended family, and she also lives in the house. She just so happened to be at her mom's house that day. So ain't no telling, she probably could have been another one of the victims if she just happened to be in that house that day. So she comes forward and she tells the detectives that the last time she seen her uncle was on Friday. And she tells him that a couple weeks ago, she thinks her uncle Cecil and his brother Jesse had robbed somebody that everybody knows by the name of Doc. So of course she's only 14 years old, but you never know how much kids know. So they asked her if she just happened to know where this Doc dude may live, and she's like, no, I don't know that. Okay, so being that she told detectives that Cecil's brother Jesse may have been involved in this robbery, they want to track him down to see what he may know and see if what Cecil's niece is saying is in fact true. Then this could possibly be a retaliation. So they start looking into him so they can bring him in for questioning. So they see that he also goes by the name Junior. And they see when he was only 19 years old, he was sentenced to serve 13 and a half years for second-degree murder. And he was just released about 7 months prior to this. So when he first comes in, they, of course, don't think he did it because this is his brother, this is his family, his nieces and his nephews. So they don't suspect that he's the one that did this. They really just want to bring him in to see if he knows anything about this Doc dude, or to see if he and Cecil did rob this Doc dude, if maybe he thinks this was a retaliation. So they begin his questioning by asking him when was the last time he seen his brother. He tells him Cecil picked him up from work on Saturday. He took him back to his house, and his girl Marissa was cooking dinner when he got there, so he stayed for dinner. And then Cecil dropped him off back home after that. Now he's sitting in this room just kikiing and smirking, feeding them all types of BS. And they just eating it up. So he goes on to tell them that his little brother is a part of the notorious gang, none other than the Gangster Disciples, otherwise known as the GDs. And Cecil and one of his fellow gang members named Doc Holliday was supposedly in some sort of feud. And because they were feuding amongst themselves, they had been called to a meeting with the higher ups. He tells them that Cecil really wasn't fucking with going to this whole meeting thing, so he chose not to go. And if you don't go to these meetings, you get written up. And the detectives are like, okay, so what happens if you get written up? He's like, look, I'm not a part of the game. I don't know what happens if they get written up. I guess they go to trial. And if you're found guilty, I guess you get your punishment. And he's just feeding them so much bullshit. Now, this is just me thinking aloud because all of this is alleged in heavy air quotes, right? He wanted to manipulate the direction of this investigation. So I truly think that the family was, bouncing ideas off of each other, trying to figure out how this happened. And this 14-year-old girl ends up mentioning the name Doc. And he's like, okay, yeah, Doc, we can go with that. So he tells the girl to go up there to the police station and tell them Doc. And when he gets called in, he tells him Doc too. So by doing this, he's able to, of course, keep the light off of him and steer the investigation in the direction that he wants it to go. So being that Jesse is Cecil's older brother and the uncle to these children that were just murdered, I don't even think it crossed their mind to even take a step back and have a second look at this man. So they send him on his way so he can go continue to grieve with the rest of his family. All right, so now their next mission is to figure out who this Doc dude is. And while they're trying to locate him, they get word from the hospital that the 3 injured children are going to survive. So they head down to the hospital to see if they can get a statement from at least one of the children. And when they get there, they talk to 9-year-old Cecil Jr. So at this time, Cecil Jr. has just gotten out of surgery from getting the blade removed from his skull. So cousin, walk and talk with me here real quick. So Cecil Jr. is only 9 years old. Now, he just got a blade removed from his head, so he's most likely on a lot of medication. He's probably severely traumatized, has PTSD, and he's waking up in a hospital room alone. His mom and dad aren't there. And then when he thinks about his parents not being there, he remembers what happened to his family. So imagine all of this going through this little boy's head while they're about to get his first initial statement. So he's all bandaged up, his eyes are swollen shut, and when they start asking him what happened on that night, he starts getting really emotional. He tells them that right before all of this goes down, he and everybody else was sitting in the living room, and somebody knocked at the door. So his mom goes to the door and answers it, and the people come inside, they're all standing in a circle, and then they just start fighting. And as he's sorting through his thoughts, trying to recall everything that happened to him and his family, he starts to hyperventilate and tears start to fall from his eyes. The detectives don't want to put any more stress on him. They end up wrapping up their interview with the hopes of continuing on at a later time. All right, now, the next day they end up getting a call from Doc. The streets must have been talking. The word was getting around that he was the one that did this, and he wanted to clear his name. So he said, I'm pulling up on you. He volunteers to come down to the station and give a statement. When he get down there, he's standing on business. He said, I ain't in no gang. I ain't part of no GDs. And me and Cecil, we ain't had no beef. He ain't ever robbed me, and he ain't ever set me up to be robbed. Me and Cecil, we good. Other than the word of a 14-year-old girl and a habitual liar by the name of Jessie Dotson, there's absolutely no reason to believe that Doc is the person that did this. So they take his statement and they send him on his way. Now at this time, they literally have 0 leads. And nobody is coming forward to try to help them solve this and figure out what happened to this family. So they ended up setting up a tip line and they offered a cash reward for anybody who can come forward with valuable information on these murders. So they get a tip from a dude that said he recently met Cecil, and he says that Cecil may owe somebody a good 200 to 300K and the mafia was looking for him. Now, clearly, he just came for the award money. He was saying anything that came to his mind about Cecil. And, of course, they don't think that he's credible, so they scratched that whole idea. They end up talking to another ex-GD member, and he comes in and pretty much tells them that the way that this crime scene was looking, the way the house looked, this was most likely something that they call a DV, which stands for death violation. And if it was in fact a DV, then somebody most likely called a blackout on Cecil's entire family. So they asked this dude, who can call a blackout? Like, can Cecil call a blackout? And he's like, nah, a blackout can only be ordered by an overseer. And I don't even know who the overseer is. So this point, they're like, God damn, if they called a blackout on the entire family, that means all the surviving family, including the kids, are still at risk. So they end up putting the entire family in protective custody. So by now, a couple days has gone by, and they want to head back to the hospital to see if they can get a more clear statement from 9-year-old Cecil Jr. So they're recording this time, and they start asking him what took place the night that all of this went down. And he tells them, I was stabbed in the chest. And they're like, yeah, do you know who stabbed you in the chest? And he says, clear as day, Junior. Now, I hope y'all is keeping up and y'all was listening to me earlier when I told y'all that everybody in the Dotson family had a nickname, and Jesse's nickname was Junior. So Jesse's ass is sitting in protective custody with the rest of the family as we speak. So detectives are like, no. Okay, let's think about this, because how in the fuck did we just get bamboozled like this? And I already know Memphis niggas, so I know this nigga Jesse was sitting in protective custody with all his family, listening to them grieve, listening to them brainstorm about who did this and why they did this. And he just sitting there like, yeah, that could be it. You should go down there and tell them that. Whole time, it's his black ass. And this is the reason why God knew not to have me in no family with no murderer. If I found out that my brother killed another one of my brothers, and you sitting in protective custody, smiling in my motherfucking face, hugging me, trying to console me, and whole time it's you that caused all this pain, bruh, we are gonna have a real motherfucking problem, because I'm finna beat your mudbone ass. They hurry up and snatch his ass up out of protective custody. Get your ass from out of there. You don't need no daggum protection. When they get Jesse down to the police station, he giving these lame ass cookie cutter answers about how the last time he seen his brother was on Saturday. He came to pick him up from work. He went back to his house to have dinner, and then he took him home, whoop-de-whoop-de-whoop. And they just not feeling it. So they bring in my nigga, Detective Armstrong. You know, he from Memphis himself. He know how to read a hood nigga. So he get in there and he takes a completely different approach. He comes in the interview room just cool, confident. He pulls a chair out, he sits down, and he in there talking like us right now, just kicking it. He like, how much time you just finished doing? And Jesse like, almost 14. And Detective Armstrong is smart. He had to appeal to the softer side of Jesse. So he says, look, we done all had some pretty bad days, and we done some pretty bad things on our worst days. And I ain't here to judge you. I want to help you. And he takes his hands, and Jesse just starts to melt. He puts his head down. He takes Detective Armstrong's hands. He starts getting all watery-eyed. And then Detective Armstrong says, brother, I got you. I got you. Memphis niggas are a motherfucker. The manipulation. So after Detective Armstrong gets Jesse all mushy and ready to spill the beans and spill all of his emotions, he leans back in his chair and he says, I'm listening. Talk. Jesse got his head down and he like, ain't nothing to say. They already gone. And it's at this time when Detective Armstrong says, all right, I'm done playing these fuck games with this man. So Detective Armstrong says, what your family call you? And Jesse's like, Junior? And he said, Junior? So everybody in your family call you Junior? And Jesse says, yeah. And then he pulls out this tape recorder and he plays the statement from the 9-year-old boy telling the detectives that it was Junior who stabbed and killed and murdered and shot his entire family. And at this time, just looking at Jesse's face, you can see his heartbeat, like the pulse in that vein in his neck. But his face just stays straight. But you can tell that his insides are eating him up. I don't know how crazy motherfuckers do shit like that. You're able to sit there with a straight face, knowing you did all of this shit, continue to lie, show no type of emotion, no remorse, and you're just completely unfazed. Your face is completely straight. Like, you have to be one crazy individual to sit there straight faced and hold your emotions, knowing good and goddamn well what you done did. So he's sitting there with a straight face. His lip starts quivering like he wants to cry, like the emotion wants to come out. And Detective Armstrong is digging in his ass. He said, "Talk! I'm listening!" So at this time, Jesse finally breaks down. And he's like, "Me and Cecil, we was riding around and we started arguing. We argued all the way home. And when we got inside the house, Cecil's still popping off at the mouth. And then he reached behind the couch and grabbed his shotgun. And when he did that, I picked up the closest gun I could and just started shooting." Detective Armstrong said, "How many times did you shoot?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "What about the women?" He said, "I didn't do nothing to the women." He's like, "Well, didn't you shoot them?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Then what happened?" He said, "The kid saw me, so I tried to get rid of him." And he said, "By doing what?" He said, "I stuck him." He said, "Well, what?" He said, "The knives I got from the kitchen drawers." So Detective Armstrong just leans back in his chair and he just stares at Jesse. And he pretty much hears everything that he needs to know. As he's wrapping up the interview and he's getting ready to walk out, Jesse's like, "I want to talk to my mama." When his mom gets there, she sits down and she's in complete mom mode. She grabs his hand and she's like, "Look at me, Junior. What happened?" And he says, "I did it." She said, "You did?" He says, "Yeah." She said, "What about the kids, Junior?" He said, "They got stabbed." She's like, "You did that?" He says, "Yeah." Now at this time, Jessie Dotson has confessed to the detectives and his mom. So he's placed under arrest and he's charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder. All right, family. Now that pretty much wraps up the first part of this case. But I'm going to do something a little bit different this week. And instead of giving you guys my take on what I think happened, I'm going to take you through the trial and give you guys the facts of the case. What? Did she just say trial? Yeah, I definitely said trial. I was as shocked as y'all were to find out that after Jesse had sat in jail for a couple weeks, he started to change his story. So after he had admitted to the detectives and to his mom that he did it, he ends up changing his story and telling his family that he was forced into giving this statement and that the police threatened to kill him if he didn't admit to doing it. So he pled innocent and took the case to trial. Now, the bold defense attorney that decided to defend Jesse, his name is Gerald Scan. So the trial begins on September 27, 2010, 2 years after the crime occurred, and it only lasted for about 2 weeks. So during the trial, the jury is able to hear witness statements from experts in ballistics and gun splatter. They're also able to get the statements of the police officers and detectives who actually worked on the case, including Detective Armstrong. Now, the defense brings forward one key witness, and the state has 2 key witnesses. The first key witness that the state brings forward is now 11-year-old Cecil Jr. Now, when he walks into the courtroom, it's silent. When he walks up to take the stand, all eyes are on him. He's wearing nice polished shoes. He has on slacks. He's wearing a tie and a button-up. But going across his head, you can see a huge scar going from ear to ear. The state starts off by asking him to describe the night that his family was murdered. And he says that he was in the back room and he heard gunshots. So he walked out the room and he seen his uncle pointing a gun at his dad, and he seen sparks and smoke coming from the gun. He didn't know if his uncle had seen him or not, so he creeped slowly into the hall to try to call for police. But when he grabs the phone to try to call for help, he looks up and he sees his uncle standing right in front of him. And in order to try to calm him down or stop him from doing whatever he thinks he's going to do, he says, "Uncle, I love you." And Jesse says, "You don't love me." And that's when he began to stab him. He says that the attack started in the hallway, and then as he got stabbed a couple times, he stumbled into the bathroom. Cecil says he ends up falling into the tub. He didn't know how many times he had been stabbed, but he knew he had just fell into the tub. And he says he played dead in order to keep his uncle from continuing to attack him. So he says while he's laying in the tub, he sees his uncle stab his younger brother. At some point, his mom ends up walking in the house and seeing everything. She's with Hollis's girlfriend, Shindri, and she's holding his 2-month-old baby sister. And Cecil Jr. says he watched his uncle shoot his mom in the back of the head. When the defense cross-examines him, they try to bring up the fact that he had 2 different statements. One was saying that a group of people did it, and then he turns around and says his uncle did it. So they didn't come at him aggressively because he's only 11 years old, but that was their argument against his testimony. The next witness that the state brings forward is Jessie's mama. And I just know Jessie was sitting there like, this bitch. Now I know it sucks that his own mom testified against him, but you have to remember, they have this confession on tape of him telling her that he did it. So the state probably subpoenaed her. Now, when she gets up there, she pretty much tells the same story about how he admitted to her that he did this to his brother and the kids. And I don't even think the defense cross-examined her. Now, the last witness to testify in court was the star witness. And he was brought forward by the defense, none other than Jessie Dotson himself. So when he takes a stand, he describes how he was bullied and he was coerced into confessing to kill his family.
And after he played the tape, after I still told him I didn't do it, that's when he said, I kill your mother ass myself. You cold-hearted, murdering, killing mother. That's what he did.
Now that clip was of Jessie giving his take on how Detective Armstrong got him to confess to the murders. He then goes on to say that the night that the murders occurred, he was in the back room and all of a sudden he heard gunshots. So his first instinct was to jump under the bed and hide. And when he came out from under the bed, everybody was dead. So the state says, Jessie, you mean to tell me that you, 1, hid under the bed the entire time while your family is being murdered, and 2, when you came out from under the bed, you couldn't even call the police? And Jessie says, you see, I'm in a gang, and it goes against everything I believe in to get the police involved. And the state says, you wouldn't even call the police to save your family? And he says, yep, that's correct. And that's how I know I couldn't be a juror, because if I was there and I heard him say that, I would have turned into the judge at that point. Guilty. Your ass is guilty. Get him out of my courtroom immediately. But after just 13 days of hearing witness testimony, a Shelby County jury convicted Jessie of 6 counts of premeditated first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death 6 times, plus 120 years for the attempted murder of the 3 surviving children. Now, cousins, hear me out. I'm all about sticking punishment to a motherfucker. But tell me this, what sense does it make to tell somebody that they're getting sentenced to death 6 times? You then want me to sit in prison for an additional 120 years? So does that mean they're going to kill him 6 times and then get his corpse and put him in a jail cell for 120 more years? I mean, Judge, is that what you really expect to happen in this situation? Now, I fuck with the fact that the judge is stressing that Jessie is never going to walk the streets a free man again. But I think letting him know that he was sentenced to death at least 1 time was good enough. I mean, we get where you were going with it. We understand what you were doing, but I think knowing the exact expiration date and time that you're going to leave this earth, that's punishment enough. So as of 2024, Jessie Dotson is still sitting on death row. Well, family, that wraps up this week's case on the gruesome murders committed by Jessie Dotson.